Galaxy Fraulein Yuna is one of those little properties that seems like it's been swept up over the years, alongside, well, basically any other small 90s entertainment property you can think of. Starting as a short adventure game for the NEC PC Engine and growing into a pretty mid-budget property with the usual assortment of OVAs, desktop accessories, and sequels, it's one that's captivated me recently thanks in part to its cutesy aesthetic, fun cast of not-so-ambiguously gay girls saving or attempting to destroy the universe, and surprisingly high production values at times, with the second game being one of the most graphically impressive games on the PCE in my book. I've done videos on those first two games, and I recommend watching them if you want to see what kind of moe shenanigans PCE owners were getting treated to in the mid and end point of their beloved console's lifespan, but today I'm taking a look at what is likely the least known game of the four, starring everyone's favorite forgotten 90s anime blonde, Galaxy Fraulein Yuna FX Siren Sadness. Except, we're not just looking at that, because this game is also an anime. No, it doesn't have an anime tie-in. This is literally the game version of the anime using video from the anime, an anime storyboarded by Akiyuki Shinbo, animated by a studio that's worked on probably a dozen things you've watched. Yeah, this shit's weird and it's gonna need context. Back in the mid-1990s, everybody was tripping over themselves trying to figure out what the way forward for gaming would be and what niches of the market were viable to capitalize on. Were cartridges or CDs better? Did people want smooth near VHS quality FMV or fancy 3D graphics? Can you appeal to just one market, or do you need to appeal to everyone to have a successful console? The answer for all three of those questions was of course the latter, and Sony was the only one of the 32-bit era that got every single one correct from the conceptual phase, but NEC had different plans in mind and created the PC FX, a CD-based console aimed specifically at otaku, focusing on providing top-quality FMV and 2D visuals, with titles like Dokusei 2, Pia Carrot, Angelique Special, and Sotsugo taking up most of the library. But even titles like Team Innocent and Power Dolls FX, a survival horror and an SRPG respectively, leaned hard into the anime aesthetic. In retrospect, I think this makes the PC FX one of the best consoles in terms of aesthetic cohesion. You pick up one of those 54 games and most of the time you're going to see something of the same visual quality as the last one you just played, which generally was superb with fantastic anime cutscenes and artwork, even if the gameplay could be as jank as any old PS1 or Saturn game. But this otaku-centric design led to Hudson Soft, who NEC required to focus exclusively on anime games with pre-rendered cutscenes, and their usual buddies of Wilco and Red Entertainment, to come up with one of the most simultaneously sensical yet weird ideas I think I've seen. What if a visual novel, but also anime? And so, long before Steins Gate Elite tried the same idea and looked like hot fucking trash doing so, Yuna FX was put on the store shelves in early 1996, following the plot of and reusing footage from the recently released OVA of almost the same name, and it's an interesting experiment for sure. As an idea, it's a pretty clever one, taking advantage of the PC FX's strength in quickly decoding and displaying pre-rendered video better than almost any console up until the PS2 or something equipped with a video CD decoder, and banking on the novelty of watching a VN seamlessly switch between high-detail stills and smooth scenes of animation, with fun minigames interspersed between to add variety. And it's not as if they chose a bad animation to base things off of either. Yuna's first OVA, released in late 1995, was something I first watched when I was 13 or 14, and wanted some cute, obscure show to spend an evening on, and I loved it then. It appealed to all of my young teen sensibilities with plenty of cute moments, big mechs, and fun drama, and Yuna was, as always, a very relatable, ditzy, but driven protagonist. But the actual execution of things? It's not great. It's mired by minigames that range from fun distractions to legitimately awful, pacing that completely falls apart in the back half, and having significantly less animation than the OVA it borrows from. But I think it's also genuinely fascinating, a piece of a bygone era where experimentation was the norm and developers were throwing out whatever crazy ideas that they could that might stick. And truthfully, even the worst concepts here are amusing just on their bizarre novelty. So let's jump straight into things, starting with the OVA itself. Directed by Yorifusa Yamaguchi, who's been around the block and worked as a director for hire on a variety of shows, Siren Sadness, or Kanashimi no Sairen in Japanese, is one of the more unique 90s tie-in OVAs I've seen in the sense that it's neither a retelling of any game or story, nor a non-canonical spin-off, but rather a bridge between Yuna 2 and the upcoming Yuna 3. So unlike something like, say, the Pia Carrot OVA I looked at a few months ago, where one can write it off as a goofy and messy, but ultimately ineffectual to the rest of the series show, there's some extra pressure here to perform, which it does through and through. Just like the games, it manages to strike a perfect balance between drama and comedy, leaning more on the latter, which is something that a lot of OVAs really struggle with. And also, much like the two PC Engine games, it's both super well paced, which helps a lot with keeping the simple story flowing along, and visually impressive in places. Despite being in crusty DVD quality, the talents of Akiyuki and the rest of the JC staff team show through with a lot of clever suspenseful shots, great action sequences, and expressive, creative, goofy comedy. It follows Yuna having a regular old time with her friend Yuri after the events of the second game. Princess Mirage has discovered the power of friendship and is no longer aiming to destroy the world, and with no other new threats showing up, she's able to live her normal life of going to school, fawning over girls, and being woken up by her house being destroyed by a giant lesbian space laser. At least, that is until a girl named Misaki transfers to her school, a quiet and distant young lass who soon reveals herself to be after Yuna. Misaki is actually a cop working under the Galaxy Alliance, assigned to investigate claims that Yuna isn't the savior of light, but rather a scheming woman who plans to take over the whole galaxy. These claims come from the mysterious Fraulein D, who, just like the true villains of the first two games, is an agent of darkness trying to get rid of Yuna so she can take over the galaxy, going to any means necessary to frame her, including destroying an entire portion of her neighborhood. It's pretty over the top and it's nothing particularly deep, but the games were exactly like that, and that's fine with me. This is here to give people who've played those a 50-minute long dopamine dose of fun action, neat shots, solid comedy, and fan service, and as someone who has played them, I had a great time here seeing some of my favorite characters from both make their first animated appearances. Even my main girl Shiori is here. This has created a bit of an issue over the years, however, as this OVA and its sequel were the only pieces of Yuna media in English up until late 2021, leading to more than a few people giving Siren Sadness reviews ranging from mixed to downright scathing because it expects context that people just probably didn't have for the longest time in the Anglosphere. The focus on humor does make this less of a problem than for its sequel, which is generally quite serious in tone, but regardless, this OVA is a lot more fun if you know about Yuna going in, if not just for the added depth of the characters, as there's practically no development for anyone that isn't a new part of the cast. Yuna is still the same as she was at the end of her second outing, being a sweet and sometimes self-serving airhead who loves getting involved in over-the-top shenanigans. Yuri is a fun and childish android who's far more enjoyable with the expressiveness of anime as opposed to still art. Mirage is the lovable teen mom, Leah is the serious big sister of the group who brings some sense to the situation, and the villains turned friends of Yuna 1 are as lovable and one-dimensional as always. Oddly enough, all of the new major characters here start out as villains. There's Fraulein D, who acts as this game's monster of the week with, sadly, not much character. You have the couple of Lucia and Laika who work under her to help stage Yuna's crimes. And then there's Misaki, who's about as much of a main character as Yuna is. The show is pretty evenly split between focusing on typical Yuna shenanigans and what's going on with her, and with handling Misaki's whole arc of going from righteous space cop to questioning of authority to being Yuna's friend because she's just that lovable, and it's honestly pretty captivating. Her scenes interacting with Leah and learning about how she's being tricked, the part where she goes on her own and investigates what the general opinion of Yuna is, are all a ton of fun, and it makes the eventual resolution where they become friends legit satisfying. And even all throughout they have this great dynamic where she's stern and dedicated to her duty, while Yuna tries to flirt with her or prove her innocence.
もしかしてこの手錠かけたの美咲ちゃん？あ、私縛ったり縛られたりそういう趣味はないよ。私だってそんな趣味あるもんか。
The characters and their interactions being so fun are one half of what makes this OVA work. The other half is the moment-to-moment comedy, which always hit the mark. If you've played the games, then you know what to expect here. Lots of slapstick, one character totally screwing something up for the other, Yuna fangirling over every new girl she sees, and some small situations escalating into something utterly ridiculous. One of my favorite bits comes from the first episode, where Lucia and Laika attempt to lure Yuna into a trap by making a trail of photos of Leah, which goes terribly wrong because of a girl who lost her dog just so happening to end up on the path, leading Yuna to help out and eventually find the dog, before the duo kidnap the dog and try to escape on a motorboat, so Yuna has Yuri throw her at the boat, destroying it in the process, only for a vortex to appear underwater that the puppy gets trapped in, so the entire city comes together with Yuri's super strength to help pull Yuna out of the vortex, thus saving the dog. It's so stupid and ridiculous that I can't help but love it, and the whole thing is animated brilliantly with incredible comedic timing and visual gags. Okay, I've put it up for long enough. This show's aesthetic is a huge vibe and seriously underappreciated. What stands out to me the most are the colors, and how there's generally a very soft look to everything. I don't doubt that the show being trapped in the DVD realm adds to it, but the colors are often gentle with the backgrounds that strike a perfect balance between gorgeous detail and watercolor fuzziness. It creates a great contrast to the action scenes with their strikingly bright explosions, as well as the weighty movement that everyone has as they jump around or battle in their mechs. There's some genuine Sakuga here, like the shot of Misaki running up the false Yuna with some fucking insane motion tracking, or just Fraulein D's introduction, which, like, holy shit, you didn't need to go this hard. I really can't think of a moment, be it action-packed or slice of life, that isn't fluidly animated or downright show-offy, which makes sense given who storyboarded it, and the fact that JC staff, even when they work with shoestring budgets like in the case of Utena, generally does pretty good work. And this came right when they were in the middle of transitioning from making assorted OVAs and game adaptations exclusively, to working on broadcast television as well, working as producers on the massively successful original Slayers right as Yuna came out. That isn't to say they just, like, suddenly stopped making OVAs, though. I mean, heck, right after this, they put out one of Battle Arena Toshinden? Oh, this sounds interesting. I gotta check that out. Well, you can't expect every licensed OVA to be a winner. Unlike my patrons, who are all winners in my heart. So, first off, I'm sorry this month's video isn't as long or in-depth as either the canon or the Angelique ones. I just didn't have as much to say here as with those, and the video I was intending to get out this month just wasn't going to work out. I've been deathly busy with work and life, and just simply reading the game I intended to talk about and things supplemental to it, and writing the script took a whole 2.5 weeks, and then said script ended up being over an hour long, and it's not even done yet, and but the good news is I should be able to get it out in May, and it'll be pretty dang dense of history and a lot of neat discussions. At least I think they're pretty neat. So stay tuned for that. I'm really proud of how the script has turned out, and I think you guys will enjoy it. I also want to thank everyone who's donated, both one-time and monthly. The Patreon just hit $25, which is wild to me. I didn't expect this channel to make that kind of progress so fast, along with crossing the 250 sub threshold and being right on the verge of 300. The YouTube algorithm is seriously brutal, especially on niche sorts of content like this, so I'm just really happy people are enjoying it. Again, thank you all, whether this is your first time viewing, you've been with me from the beginning, whether you're donating or just enjoy the show, any sort of support means the world to me. And as per usual, if you do want to help out, I have the aforementioned Patreon as well as a Kohi account for one-time donations, the former of which will get your name up on the screen there as long as you're subbed, and the latter just for the next video. There isn't any pressure to donate though, just watching these videos is enough. Subscribing is extra, sharing is extra, and donation is just being cool as hell. However, there is an incentive to reach $100 a month on Patreon, and when I do reach that, I'll buy a Panasonic 3DO, because it has a lot of weird shit that is straight up this channel's alley. Like, half of the library is Japan exclusive, and you have stuff like Dr. Hauser, which is a weird game like Alone in the Dark, though it might have actually preceded Alone in the Dark, I don't quite remember. Either way, Platform's just got a ton of cool stuff on it that I really want to talk about, so if you want to see me review weird-ass 3DO games, consider throwing $1 or $2 a month, and it'll eventually stack up with everybody else's, and I'll get to talk about more weird niche shit than just the PCFX. But returning to the topic at hand, that's Yuna's first OVA. It's a fun comedy with some story that ranges from cute to intriguing, backed up by animation that's always comfy and sometimes outright gorgeous, and the fact that Yuna's just a ton of fun no matter what situation she's in makes the whole thing worth a watch in my book. So how exactly does one turn this all into a video game? Well, the answer is you don't. Yuna FX is by no means a good video game. I'd argue it's barely even a video game, but it did keep my attention for a whole 3.5 hours because of how utterly surreal and bizarre it feels to play, giving off the same vibes of developers given incredible amounts of freedom and no goal in mind as some Dojin games. It can be divided into 3 distinct sections: full animated cutscenes in which you're effectively just watching the show but compressed into a series of Super Nintendo resolution JPEGs, visual novel sections in the style of Yuna 1 and 2, and a very small handful of rudimentary minigames. Going over those in order, the first is pretty much what it says on the tin, and despite being the least game part of the game, it was the most captivating for me. I'm a dork that loves analog video and early digital video. I collect VHS tapes and laserdiscs. I will gladly burn my retinas out staring at CRT phosphors and spotting the differences between different displays, and the magic of seeing a console from 1994 managing to put out video that rivals something like a VHS tape? It's genuinely impressive, and it's hard to put into words what it's like to experience firsthand. These segments are mixed right into the visual novel sections for highlighting key moments, with the actual text portion of the novel almost exclusively told using still images, though the transition between the two is very seamless. Because of how the PC FX decodes video by using a special kind of JPEG and appropriate hardware to display up to 30 of them per second, there's no noticeable change between motion or a still, which leads to moments that, again, are charming just for the novelty of it all. The whole thing, with one big exception, is much more kinetic than either of the prior games though, with all of the ADV game type verbs being taken out in favor of select scenes, giving you one choice that progresses the story along, and 1 or 2 others that give some admittedly pretty cute flavor text to situations. This game not really having any explorative elements is just kind of a result of being what it is, given the fact that everything is significantly higher budget to produce here than, say, the pixel art of the first 2 games. It all had to have been drawn by a whole studio of professional anime artists and voiced by voice actors who were probably quite busy at that time, and edited by an editor for the OVA itself, and then scored by a musician with real instruments. Actually, that one doesn't so much apply here, because this game generates its music in real time. The version of the OVA here has had a grand majority of its music tracks stripped out and replaced with chiptunes lovingly rendered by the PCFX's main sound generator, basically the same one used in the PC Engine, which you think would create some odd tonal whiplash with the high quality visuals and bit bloops going with it, but it actually works shockingly well with the silly vibes of the whole thing. Unfortunately, it's in the minigames that everything really starts to fall apart. The game opens up with something out of a Mega CD game, where you have to fight a mock battle of L-Line, Yuna's mech, using a couple of different commands like attack and dodge, with each successful move of yours building up energy to unleash special attacks and defenses with your opponent doing the same. It's rudimentary and inoffensive at worst, and kind of charming at best, held together by the fact it's rather easy. Just continue to attacking until the enemy has built some gauge up, then put up a defense, and continue to attack until the game prompts you to build up energy and unleash a killing blow. They repeat this at the end of the game too, and it's about as easy there. The next comes a few minutes after, when Yuna and Yuri are woken up by Mirage's gay space laser to get up and go to school, where you have to dress them out in their outfits using a slot machine, and I can't tell if I love or hate this one. On one hand, it's absolutely terrible to play, because you need to line up free reels 4 times, 1 for each piece of clothing. You can use either credits to roll, which you have a practically infinite amount of and are nigh impossible to land anything with, or gold, which slows the machine to a crawl and is only given if you get certain winning combinations. And if you screw one piece of the outfit up, the game will tell you that it's wrong without saying what you got wrong, because it seemingly expects the player to have seen the OVA prior, or that you're willing to flip through the manual for any sort of hints. It's awful, but in the way that Akusoge is terrible. My roommate and I both took passes at trying to land the right slots, and I kept trying to jog my memory of what their skull outfits were like, and I managed to get them right in the first attempt for Yuna and my second of Yuri. And then the game asks you to do the same for both their casual outfits when they go out shopping in the middle of the first episode, and I just gave it up and looked it up online. The next comes in the scene where Yuri throws Yuna at the boat with a puppy in it, which is legit the best in the whole game because of how simple and fun it is. Just charge up meter for distance, time your shots right, and watch as Yuna's cute little sprite gets flung across and Yuri makes cute little quips about everything. This is about the point where the first episode starts coming to a climactic conclusion, with Misaki taking out the fake Yuna and putting the real Yuna under arrest, prompting Yuri and Leah, who both witness it, to come together to break her out and make Misaki realize exactly what's going on and how she's being tricked. And it leads us to the home of the last few minigames and the game-exclusive content, with an entire new sequence at the midpoint of episode 2 that has some legit great new animation. And this! A roughly hour-and-a-half long section consisting of slowly walking through pre-rendered hallways that all look the same, entering rooms with monitors to watch new content, and playing minigames that are mostly all atrocious to unlock elevators to the next floor. This is what I meant when I said there was a big exception to this game not really having interaction, and I wish this wasn't the big exception. There's a little spaceship shooter without any shooting where you fly through asteroids and pick up food for extra hits, which feels horrible to control, a puzzle where you need to assemble a picture of Leah, which is actually quite fun, and a terrible hacking minigame with a 4x9 grid, each containing a portrait of a different character from Yuna 2 and a point value. Match it with another of the same character and value, and you get points and a chance to make another match. As soon as you fail, your opponent gets a turn until they fail, and so on and so on, and 36 tiles are just way too many to memorize, man. So I ended up just writing out a chart of what was where, which isn't easy because the game does not give you much time to remember what squares your opponent chose, and using that to cheat my way through the whole thing. Fuck this! Also, this is one of the few minigames you can repeat, and I accidentally repeated it without knowing it, which took me 15 fucking minutes to clear, even with the cheat sheet. And that's basically it. Once you've cleared the dungeon, the latter half of the final episode plays out like normal for the game until the FMV fight at the end, and the game's over, roll credits. There's some additional content in the Omake menu, but it's just delightfully low quality pictures of Yuna products and artwork, which... yeah, okay, this is honestly pretty fucking cute. It's far from archival grade. You're not putting this in a museum, but it's pretty charming in its own right, and might be one of the earliest examples of a game with a concept art gallery that I know of, though I'm sure someone's going to rush to the comments to correct me. But Yuna FX is a weird little game. It's made up of a bunch of individual parts that rarely ever mesh, and its core gimmick, while very fun and novel, can't hold the experience together with the sheer nosediving quality it has in the second half and the generally middling performance of the first. I can't say I recommend this game at all unless you're a Yuna fangirl and are just dying to experience everything the franchise has to offer, or you want to see another entry into the realm of developers trying every possible concept in a fresh genre out. Personally, I'm both of those kind of people. I loved the first two games and enjoyed seeing what was in here, even if it was kinda hot garbo, and I have a fascination with the experimental era of mostly sedentary genres. I intend to talk about this more in future episodes focusing on specific massively influential games like Yuno and Dokusei, but the middle and particularly early 90s were a time when Japanese adventure games were still constantly experimenting with what could be done, and titles with fresh ideas were coming out left and right. Some of those games, like the incredible original Dokusei, ended up pushing the Japanese computer games industry into bold new directions with a ripple effect on gaming as a whole. Some like Xenon were early steps towards something bigger, and others like Yuna FX toyed with quirky new concepts and failed to live up to the potential of them in any meaningful way. While games like this may have ultimately not have had much of an impact on anything, I think there's still a time and place for talking about them, what could have been, and what we ultimately got, because there's always ideas to take away and lessons to learn from something, and hey, let's face it, sometimes Kuso like this is as fun as any well-polished experience.